Chaps, right. I found something out the other day, right? And we get pulled into like conferences, whatever, doesn't really matter what it is. And when we talk about masculinity, very, very few people use the term masculinity without saying toxic masculinity.
Mm.
And it's getting extremely frustrating, if I'm honest with you, because they're two totally and utterly different things. I just think there's toxic people and there's not toxic people. It really is as simple as that. You get the feminists and even the trans as well. There's some extremely, in those worlds, extremely toxic people. But it seems to be that when it comes to masculinity, it's one of the few things where it's just one size fits all. You like engines, you like
Yeah, they're kind of,
you're a
they're
chick.
conjoined, aren't they, for some
No,
reason?
no, absolutely. But I done some sorcery the other day actually, and I shared this. It's just in the UK, every 30 days in google.co.uk, there's 20,000 people every 30 days searching for, where are we? Searching for the term, what is toxic masculinity? Well, in the USA, there's nearly 80,000. Globally, there's 100, well, just over 145,000 people searching for that. But the thing is, I think that's a really good thing. That's a lot of people at least taking the time to go, well, what is it? I don't have
Yeah.
Did you
Well,
say
what is it?
Did you
What
say
is it?
80,000 in the US, 20,000 in the UK, 145 overall?
That's globally.
Global, isn't it?
This is only in Google according to their own data.
Right. Okay. No, I only ask because it sounded like it's mainly people in the English-speaking Western world that are researching what toxic masculinity is, rather than it being kind of a global concern, so to speak.
Is that because culturally there's a difference in it that, like, you know, is it even a phrase? Does it even exist in other countries? It probably doesn't. But actually, if you kind of almost copied and pasted some of that culture into the UK and we behaved in a similar way, we'd probably be pigeonholed into that category. But that doesn't mean that it's wrong where in those parts of the world, because actually it probably isn't. But over in this country, it might be seen that way. It's like it's bizarre, isn't it? And like we said just before we came on, like everybody's got a different slant on it. Everybody's got a different take on it. It's not one of those things you can just like lick your finger and stick on it and say that's exactly what it is, because we all see it slightly differently.
I think that's right, Ian. Sort of in the conversations I've been having with people, I'm one of the people that turns up in Dan's Google search stats. And a paper I read the other day was about whether or not, so if you're doing research, you need to be really precise about what you mean when you're researching something. And this paper was saying that we've reviewed, I think it was 39 papers, 39 studies of toxic masculinity, and none of the papers matched in their definition of which behaviors constituted toxic masculinity. So, and that's not particularly useful from a research point of view, because it means that you can't compare and contrast one paper with another.
We can't define it.
Studying the same thing. Yeah.
So was it just complete mismatch, or was there like core areas that were similar? It's like I would imagine there must be like a core kind of.
That's a really good question. I mean, my interest, as you know, is mental health. So when I'm doing searches, I'm probably doing using search terms like toxic masculinity, mental health, or maybe toxic masculinity combined with other mental health related search terms. And most of the papers that I've read examine behaviors like they sort of describe toxic masculinity as self-reliance and not asking for help, that kind of a thing. And then they're looking to see whether that's a cause of mental health or a barrier, mental ill health, or a barrier to people seeking help. And there is some evidence, some studies in the most macho environments of all, like prisons, that that a kind of concern about being seen as weak and a need to rely upon yourself because you can't trust other people can prevent some men for asking for help when they need it. But they're being really quite precise about what they mean by toxic masculinity. And of course, the reality is that when you think about an issue like male suicide, it's just I wrote a blog couple of months ago, which didn't really get much traction, although people did message me privately about it. And I was arguing that sort of progressive left-wing people blame male suicide on toxic masculinity, whereas sort of conservative right-wing people say, well, actually, it's the erosion of traditional masculine roles that's causing the problem. The evidence doesn't really match the political argument at all, and even those studies in prison say it's not the cause of it might stop people asking for help, but actually we know that over 60% of people, 60% of men ask for help before they go on to die from suicide. So that suggests to me that it's a little bit of a red herring. It's not really, it doesn't really help us to better understand male suicide, and the evidence talks about things which have got nothing to do with toxic masculinity, really. They're to do with like relationship breakdown, job loss, worrying about your finances, losing contact with your children through the family court system, or surviving domestic abuse or sexual abuse. Nothing to do that, you know. I think it's a red herring, really, this toxic masculinity.
Yeah, no, I agree with it. And I think the thing what concerns me quite a bit, I'm going to contradict myself, because I think the term toxic masculinity, I think people are now starting to go, do you know what, I can't be asked for all that kind of stuff. It's just to get on with it. I think they're slowly starting to ignore it. I think the thing is what blokes don't talk. I think it's because I personally think it is in our DNA, because we don't want to fail. We fix stuff. It's in our DNA. It's been like that since the beginning of time. But I think the minute I'm like, well, what's the point of me talking if I'm going to be prejudged because I like racing, or Steve does, I like tools, I like that typical bloke stuff. If I'm going to be pigeonholed, I'm never going to be able to ask for help, because it's like, oh man, you're just toxic. Why? Because I'm just a typical bloke.
Because there's something wrong with you. In other words, not that there is a problem in your life that might be giving you concern that you don't have complete control over.
Yeah, no, absolutely that, and that does concern me. That maybe we're gonna start seeing blokes going backwards of not wanting to talk, because if just like the typical bloke is just going to be branded as toxic, that's the first thing. And here's an example. I don't know if you watched the video where there's a load of powerlifters. I think they're England champions or world champion powerlifters. These are beasts. And I said to him, and it was a wake up call for me. And I said to him, I went, so you clearly work or train in such a toxic masculinity. And I shouldn't have said toxic masculinity. I meant to say a masculine world. I corrected him, and that obviously we don't, as you know, we don't edit the videos, and that was a massive wake-up call, where here's me actively quite anti that term. Have said you train in quite a toxic masculine
environment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's going to end up silencing blokes, because what's the point if I'm going to be prejudged? I don't want to get the old little violins out, but I was raised in care and all this kind of stuff. And the one thing, when he used to run away and the police used to come and collect you from the trains, and because you used to jump the trains and all this kind of stuff, you can't really get away with it now, I guess. Well, it depends on where you go. Sorry, but
you probably can, to be fair, because they're shutting all the ticket offices.
Oh, there you go. No one might say, but no, I think the thing is the first thing they do is when they used to come and get you is that they'll presume that you're just a little shit who's just out of control or whatever else. So that, and I find that's why a lot of children, a lot of kids, both genders, they seem like the wild child. It's like, what if you're going to prejudge people, then they will not talk. They will kick back, and I've spent most of my life like that. And I think, sorry if I'm waffling, I think this is going to be a big problem for the typical blokes.
Yeah. I think I understand what you mean, Dan. Yeah.
Well, I think does anybody use the term toxic femininity?
I was thinking that, like, I mean, it must exist, right? It has to exist.
Well, you do. There are some people.
Well, it is because it's people being prejudged, and it's all this, that all comes from social media, which is all toxic femininity, where people have their, and I mean, you see a lot of them on Facebook and stuff where they've retouched everything, and like the pane of glass behind it's all gone wobbly, where they've, retouched bits and pieces. But this whole, I mean, that's been going on for decades. This whole kind of size zero thing, and the fact that women should have boobs or shouldn't have boobs, or should have a bum, shouldn't have a bum. You know, this whole kind of, you know, well, what you would call a curvaceous figure, I suppose, you know, is frowned upon because they're not a size 0. So that's been going on for bloody decades. But that doesn't seem to be a phrase as such. Toxic femininity, you know, doesn't seem to be a phrase like toxic masculinity.
Yeah,
Yeah, I mean,
it's even like the trans world and up to a point, and I've had this discussion with, I know me and Ezra and Ben were laughing about it the other day. It's like that term queer. I really do not like that word because of just my upbringing. For me, it's quite a negative thing. But obviously, there's a lot.
Same with me. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a lot of the queer community who they massively embrace it, and I'm quite happy to use that terminology around Ben because that's what he refers to himself as, if that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
But even in that, in the, I don't even want to say the letters because I probably missed something. But even with that, I'm seeing a small section of that turning extremely toxic. But we don't talk about it, and I think the thing is once we focus on the toxic side of whatever, it silences 99% of the other people. So like, what's the point of talking about it? Because you're going to judge me, you're going to put me in the same pigeonhole as these things. And I think it's a problem, not just for men. It's just, I think we just need to put all toxic people in. You're a knob, mate.
I think you're right, Dan. I think the other thing is, I've been following the Tin Men on Instagram, and
I need to check them out. Actually, yeah, you keep saying,
and so the guy that puts his thing is putting sort of infographics together that can sort of communicate stats to sort of question ideas about men's issues and whether they hold up or not. And what he argues is that, he argues a number of things. But one of them is, if I've understood him correctly, that men tend to get blamed for the issues that affect men rather than any consideration for the environment that they're living in being given consideration to. So if it's another group of people, the issues which affect them, more often than not, the sort of progressive people that want to do something about those issues are saying, well, you know, it's people, if it's women and girls being sexually harassed in the streets, we need to do something to stop the men from doing that. We need to address kind of systemic sexism and what have you. Whereas or you know, we need to address racist attitudes in the general population. Whereas with men's issues, it's male behaviours that are to blame. So he challenges that. And then the other argument that he makes is that if there isn't some kind of effort to provide the right kinds of services for men or to address men's issues without blaming them for it, then, as you say, Dan, they might avoid seeking help because they're sort of concerned about being prejudged, or just told that it's toxic masculinity, or they'll seek help from other places on the internet, and you know, follow Andrew Tate and people of that nature for their kind of guidance on how to live their lives,
or their Apple well-being app that we were talking about last time,
or their Apple well-being app, whatever it might be. Yeah.
I think there's a danger though, isn't it? Like, I forgot about Dan's example when you're talking to these power lifters, and like you say, you got the terminology slightly wrong, but those guys operating in that environment and powerlifting and being in that community, that does wonders for their mental health. Like, I saw a quote the other day that's like, men don't talk about their mental health, and we wouldn't be here if we didn't. But actually, like, what do we do to be mindful as a general population? And you kind of like think, well, this is fairly new in the conversation piece, and generationally, like, my folks would never talk about it. But actually, when you kind of drill it down, like, your old man would potter around in the shed, or they'd go and have a game of golf, or they'd go and spend some time with their mates down the pub. And that's the old school way of being mindful, is by doing that kind of thing, you know? And I think a lot of the time we don't get enough credit for how we do that stuff, because that's just enough thinking time, switch off time, pottering around in the shed or down the allotment or whatever. Sometimes that's enough to just kind of to keep the wolf at bay, you know?
They're ways of meeting needs, aren't they? And although people are beginning to talk about the importance of emotional needs and the fact that all humans have got these needs that have to be met, just like they need food and drink and sleep and what have you. They need community, they need meaning and purpose, they need shared connections and so on. We're not at a stage yet where we're able to recognize, You know, that person's spending time in the shed, pottering around because they're getting some meaning and purpose and a sense of achievement from it, or maybe some privacy and some downtime to sort of like, you know, process the day because they've been busy, you know, in the workplace or whatever it is. Or and until we get to the point where people recognize the value of these things, I don't think that they'll necessarily be able to stop themselves and say, well, hang on a moment, actually, if guys are going and they're kind of doing bodybuilding or they're working out, then I might be giving them a sense of achievement. They're getting some exercise, they're meeting up with other men, they're comparing notes on techniques and, you know, nutrition supplements and what have you. And they've got a sense of community. It's a huge amount going on there, isn't there? That isn't obvious.
Massive, yeah.
Just see it as like, yeah,
massive.
People meeting needs.
Yeah, I think that's quite a valid point, and that's something that we promote quite heavily on MANUP. Is if you're doing something and if you're in a lull, find something what will help you get out of that lull, and that could be anything. If you want to do husky racing, if you want to play with a calculator, I'll look at Ian straight, presuming that's what Ian does in his hobby.
Yeah, I'm sure he does. Yeah, yeah.
I can get all sorts of words out of it now, not just those. Thanks.
Well, okay, but do you get what I mean? It's just like Ezra does the jiu-jitsu. It doesn't matter what you do as long as you try it. Because if you're sitting there and you're struggling with life and you haven't tried anything, well, that's not working. And we actively try and do all that. Just do whatever, do something and help yourself a little bit as well. I think that's something what we can get sucked into that pity party a little bit, doesn't it? And I think this is why I like to surround myself with people like Dan. You being a prick, well done, Dan, and all this kind of stuff, and it just kind of works. Steve's the only one that actually says that, but
I can start, mate. Not a problem.
Yeah, I can feel your warm.
Get in the queue, Ian.
Absolutely. So
I'll schedule some emails to send to you at certain times of the day, mate, with various expletives on, if that's going to help you.
No, Steve's been doing that for about 7 years now, man. So there we go. So I think we're all agreed, aren't we? We just need to separate toxic people from toxic from just masculine people.
Oh, completely, 100%. Because toxic people can take any form.
Yeah,
can take any form. You know, they're not. You know, I mean, they are masculine, but they're everything. You know, they're not just masculine, and that's the key to it, I think. Yeah, it's separating the two completely.
No, exactly. And I think that the people like the Tates and all this kind of stuff, do you know what? Just piss off.
They're extremes.
I wonder whether that was a neat summary, Dan. I don't mean to we could have left it there, I suppose, but I wonder if it's a bit like, you know, when you know, if your kid is misbehaving, you know, you can tell the child, you know, that they're naughty and criticize them directly, and then they might come to believe that that's what they're like as people. Or you can say, you know, when you're doing that particular behavior, that's not good, and then you're separating the person from the behavior. So you're not blaming them, you're saying, you know, we love you and we don't want you behaving like that because that causes stress.
Well, and it's maybe redirecting that effort. So that effort that they're putting into being toxic, if that's the word we want to use, you redirect that into, right, you're being a pain in the arse, let's go out for a ride on a bike.
Yeah.
Or, you know, let's go for a walk. Let's get the dog, you know, we'll go out for a walk across the fields for half an hour. So you remove them from that situation and that, hopefully, that state of mind at the same time.
Yeah.
And on that bombshell.
Yeah, I'm no counsellor, so don't take that as necessarily advice.
No,
but...
I think this is the thing. I think this is the thing. And then we will draw to clarity. I think this is the thing when it comes down to, and I have these conversations a lot. It's like, I know I'm not qualified, but like, how do I speak to my mate? I'm like, just fucking speak to him like you'd normally speak to him. You don't need to be qualified to have a normal conversation.
Yeah, agreed.
But there we go. But on that bombshell.
Yes.
I hit that record button. Bear with me 1 second.